Working the night shift at a small-town hospital in Ohio, Nurse Rachel was used to quiet halls and the occasional late-night emergency. One night in 2012, around 3 a.m., she was doing her rounds when she noticed a man sitting at the end of the corridor in a hospital gown. She assumed he was a confused patient who had wandered out of his room. Rachel walked toward him, softly asking if he needed help. But as she got closer, she realized something was off. His skin was pale gray, his eyes completely blank. Before she could react, the man stood up and slowly turned the corner. Rachel followed immediately, but the hallway was empty. Confused, she checked the rooms nearby. That's when her stomach dropped. She recognized the man's face in a photo on the wall. He was a former patient who had died 2 years earlier in that very ward. Rachel later learned she wasn't the only one who had seen him. Other staff admitted to encountering the silent patient during night shifts, always around 3 a.m., always vanishing without a trace. Mark was working the overnight shift at a gas station off a lonely stretch of highway in Arizona. Most nights were uneventful, just a few truckers passing through. Around 2 a.m., a man walked in wearing a dirty coat and wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. The man didn't speak. He just stared at Mark for a long, uncomfortable minute before walking to the back of the store. Mark tried to break the silence, asking if he needed help, but there was no response. The man eventually walked out without buying anything. Minutes later, Mark went outside for a smoke. To his shock, the parking lot was empty. No footsteps, no tire marks, nothing. The security camera footage was even more disturbing. It showed Mark talking nervously toward the counter, but the camera captured no one else in the store. Locals later told Mark about a drifter who had been killed near that gas station in the late 90s. Some say he still roams the area, silently appearing to night shift workers before disappearing into the dark desert. Sarah was a college student working nights at the campus library in Pennsylvania. Her job was simple: restock books, keep things quiet, and lock up by midnight. One evening, she went down to the basement storage room to shelve a cart of old texts. The basement was always a little eerie, with its flickering lights and rows of dusty shelves. But that night, Sarah heard something new: faint whispers. At first, she thought other students had snuck in, but when she called out, no one answered. The whispers grew louder, like multiple voices chanting in low tones. Chilled, Sarah hurried back upstairs. But when she checked the security monitors, the basement camera clearly showed movement, dark figures shifting between the aisles. She wasn't imagining it. She refused to go back down alone. The next morning, when the daytime staff opened the basement, nothing was out of place. Yet Sarah swore she never worked another night shift again. Years later, other student employees would also complain about whispers from the basement, always after closing time. David was the only clerk working the graveyard shift at a rundown roadside motel in Texas. Around 1:30 a.m., the phone at the front desk rang. On the other end was a woman whispering urgently, "Please send someone to room 6. He's here." David froze. Room 6 had been unoccupied for weeks. Still, protocol required he check. He grabbed a spare key and nervously approached the door. The room was dark, but he could hear faint breathing inside. When he flicked the light on, the space was empty. No guest, no luggage, nothing. Shaken, David went back to the desk. Minutes later, the phone rang again. Same whisper, same words. "Please send someone to room 6. He's here." This time, David didn't answer. He pulled the records the next morning and learned a chilling detail. 10 years earlier, a woman had been murdered by her boyfriend in that very room. Other clerks later admitted they too had received those midnight calls from room 6, always from a woman's voice, always pleading for help. Anthony worked nights at a massive shipping warehouse in Illinois. His job was mostly solitary, scanning pallets and preparing shipments for the morning crew. One night around 3 a.m., he began hearing heavy footsteps echoing through the empty aisles. Assuming it was a coworker, Anthony called out, but no one responded. The footsteps grew closer, then suddenly stopped right behind him. He spun around. Nothing was there. Trying to shake it off, he returned to work, only to hear the sound again. this time above him on the catwalk. When Anthony checked the security cameras, he nearly dropped the monitor. The footage clearly showed a shadowy figure pacing the upper level, though no one was scheduled to be in the building. Minutes later, the power cut out across the warehouse, plunging everything into silence. Anthony quit 2 weeks later, convinced the warehouse was haunted. Other night shift workers have since reported the same eerie footsteps, always pacing, always following, but never showing a face.